John Riley's life was as routine as the desert wind. The hum of engines in his garage, the sizzle of welding sparks, and the distant sound of coyotes were all the company he needed most days. His small mechanic shop, perched on the edge of nowhere, catered to the odd trucker passing through the barren stretch of highway, and that was enough for him. He wasn't one for surprises, and in the middle of nowhere, surprises were rare. That evening, the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a cool twilight. John had settled into his usual night ritual, coffee in hand, sitting at his workbench under the dim glow of a single overhead bulb. His old radio crackled with static, catching fragments of distant stations, but John liked the white noise. It was soothing, predictable. Then, something pierced the quiet, a sharp, crackling sound, like thunder, but it came from the ground, not the sky. John snapped upright. His hand stilled, and the air felt charged, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He stepped outside the garage, feeling the ground vibrate beneath his boots. Out in the distance, beyond the low hills, a strange light bloomed. At first, he thought it might be a meteor, a fireball blazing through the sky. But this light was different. It was too bright, too controlled. John squinted, trying to make sense of it. The light was coming from the ground itself, pulsating in rhythmic flashes, as if beckoning him closer. John's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts screamed for him to turn back, to get in his truck and leave. But curiosity tugged at him stronger than caution. Grabbing a flashlight and his old hunting rifle just in case, he hopped into his pickup and headed toward the strange glow. As he approached, the light dimmed slightly, revealing the source, a small, metallic object half buried in the sand. It was about the size of a car, sleek and egg-shaped, with smooth, seamless edges that reflected the desert moonlight. John had seen his share of wrecks, but nothing like this. This was no ordinary crash. His pulse quickened as he got closer. The air around the object felt strangely cool, almost too cold for the desert. He edged toward the craft, rifle in one hand, flashlight in the other, and shone the beam across the surface. Strange symbols were etched into the metal swirls and lines that glowed faintly, like embers. Before he could take another step, the door of the pod hissed open. John froze. A moment of silence hung in the air, and then a small figure stumbled out, collapsing onto the sand. John's breath caught in his throat. At first glance, it looked like an elephant, but only in the vaguest sense. It had a trunk and large ears, but its skin wasn't gray and leathery. It shimmered, reflecting the light in iridescent hues that shifted between blue, purple, and green. Its body was smaller than a real elephant, maybe the size of a large dog, and its eyes massive, liquid black orbs looked up at John with a mixture of fear and pain. That's when John noticed the wound. A deep gash marred the creature's forehead, just above its eyes, oozing a bright green fluid. The fluid glowed faintly, pulsating in sync with the creature's labored breathing. John had seen animals wounded in the wild before, but this was different. The wound looked unnatural, as if it had been caused by something precise and mechanical. John knelt beside the creature, cautiously lowering his rifle. Hey, easy now," he muttered, his voice low and soothing. His hands trembled as he reached out, unsure of what to do. The creature flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. Its large eyes locked with his, pleading. "What the hell are you?" John whispered. The creature's trunk moved weakly, brushing against his arm. It made a soft, almost musical sound, a cry, John realized, filled with desperation. Without thinking, he pulled off his jacket and pressed it against the creature's wound, trying to staunch the flow of the glowing liquid. "I don't know what to do here," John said, panic creeping into his voice. "You need a vet. Or something." His mind raced, but he knew there was no one he could call. No one would believe him. He barely believed what he was seeing. As John pressed the jacket against the wound, the creature's trunk curled around his wrist, holding him in place. A jolt shot through his body, not painful, but strange, like an electric current buzzing under his skin. For a moment, John's mind swam with images, flashes of a world beyond his comprehension. Towering trees with silver leaves, cities floating in the air, and creatures like the one in front of him, thriving under strange skies. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving John gasping for air. He blinked, trying to shake off the sensation. The creature stared up at him, its eyes dimming, its breathing slowing. "I'll help you," John found himself saying, though he had no idea how. All he knew was that the creature needed him, and for some inexplicable reason, he felt connected to it. He scooped the alien elephant into his arms, surprised by how light it was, and carried it back to his truck. "Hang on, little guy," he muttered, setting it gently on the passenger seat. He grabbed his toolkit from the back, not sure what tools he might need, but figuring he'd better be prepared. As John drove back to his garage, the craft that had brought the creature here hummed softly behind him, slowly sinking deeper into the desert sand, as if it were being reclaimed by the earth itself. Whatever had brought this creature to him wasn't over. It was just beginning. Back in his garage, John Riley paced nervously, glancing at the alien creature lying on his workbench. It looked worse now. Its skin no longer shimmered like before, and the glowing green fluid that leaked from its head had started to slow, though that didn't seem like a good sign. John had done what he could, wrapping the wound with a clean rag, but he was no doctor, much less a veterinarian for alien species. The creature's breathing was shallow, and John could sense its life slipping away. For the first time in years, panic clawed at his chest. He had been through enough hardship to make him tough, lost loved ones, a failed marriage, and a business that barely scraped by in this forgotten part of the world. But this was something else entirely. The life of this strange, helpless being now rested in his hands. He pulled up a chair next to the workbench, staring at the creature's massive, dark eyes. He could almost feel its pain, but worse, there was something more in those eyes, a deep intelligence, and even fear. "What are you?" John whispered again, not expecting an answer. The creature's trunk moved slightly, brushing against a nearby metal rod, a long tool that John used to adjust engine parts. He furrowed his brow. The movement was too deliberate to be random. Cautiously, he picked up the rod, feeling the cold metal in his hands. That's when it happened. The second his skin made contact with the tool, a sudden rush of energy surged through his body. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced. A bright light flashed behind his eyes, and his thoughts scattered as if someone else had invaded his mind. Then, images came. Not his own memories, but something alien and foreign. He saw strange forests with trees that sparkled like crystals, towering over a world filled with vibrant hues that shifted in waves. The sky was not blue but a deep violet, dotted with twin suns that hung low on the horizon. In this vision, he was not himself but something else. He saw through the eyes of another creature, similar to the alien baby in front of him, but larger, more majestic. He felt their emotions: calmness, unity, peace. Then suddenly, terror. A fleet of dark ships descended from the sky, their angular shapes blotting out the twin suns. The serene planet was thrown into chaos as beams of red light rained down from the ships. Screams of fear filled his ears, and he saw creatures like the one on his table fleeing, hiding, trying to escape. But they couldn't. They were being hunted. Captured. Killed. The images blurred, becoming more intense. John's mind felt like it was being pulled apart, but he couldn't stop the flow. He saw monstrous figures emerging from the ship's humanoid, but not quite. They were tall, with mechanical augmentations grafted to their bodies. Weapons, sleek and deadly, were built into their arms. These beings marched through the beautiful alien world, capturing its inhabitants, harvesting them like cattle. John felt the alien's fear grow stronger in his mind, and finally, the vision shifted back to the present, to the creature itself, the last survivor of its kind. Its family, its people, all taken or killed. And now, they were hunting it too. "Help me," a voice echoed in John's head, though no words were spoken. John snapped out of the vision, gasping for air. The rod clattered to the floor, and he staggered back, pressing a hand to his temple. The voice had felt so real, like someone had whispered directly into his brain. His eyes darted to the creature. Its trunk was still weakly moving, trying to reach out, trying to communicate. "They're coming, aren't they?" John said aloud, still catching his breath. The alien blinked slowly, its eyes flickering. Another wave of thoughts hit John, but this time, they were clearer. Danger. Close. They hunt us. Need help. Power. John's mind reeled as he tried to process what he had just learned. This wasn't some random alien encounter. This creature was fleeing from something. Something big, and now they were coming for it, and maybe, for him too. "Who's after you?" John muttered, scanning the empty desert through the window of his garage. "And what do they want?" The alien's trunk shakily pointed at John's chest, and another surge of energy coursed through him. This time, he didn't resist the message. Power. They want us for power. John's heart pounded harder. He didn't fully understand what the creature meant, but he knew it was bad. Whoever they were, they wanted more than just the creature's life. They wanted something from its species, something valuable enough to kill for. His mind raced. He had to think. If those hunters, the ones from his vision, were coming, they'd likely already be on their way. They knew where the creature was, and now they'd know John too. There was no way he could outrun something like that, not out here in the middle of the desert with no place to hide. John stared down at the wounded creature. Its breathing had slowed even more, and the glow from its wound was starting to fade. It wouldn't last much longer without help. The rod that had triggered the visions lay on the floor. John knelt down and hesitated before picking it up again. There was no time for second-guessing now. If this thing could somehow give him a way to fight back, to protect both of them, he had to try. When his hand touched the rod, the connection flared again. This time, the images were more controlled, clearer. He saw the alien baby species using a form of energy that came from within their own bodies. They could harness it, manipulate it, use it to power their technology, and even defend themselves. But they were peaceful. They had no concept of weapons or war. They didn't stand a chance against the invaders. The next thought hit him harder than the others. You can help. Use it. You have the energy now. John blinked, confused. What do you mean? I don't have anything. I'm just a dash. But before he could finish, he felt the pulse inside him. It was subtle at first, like a small electrical current running through his veins. The alien had done something to him, transferred something. The connection between them wasn't just mental anymore. It was physical. John looked down at his hands, feeling a warmth in his palms. A blue light flickered briefly in the center of his right hand, then disappeared. The alien creature let out a soft cry, another message, one of gratitude, and then its trunk went limp. John's heart skipped a beat. He dropped the rod and rushed to its side. The creature's breathing was shallow, barely there. No, 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 stay with me. John pleaded, his voice shaking. He didn't know what to do, how to save it. But deep inside, he knew one thing. It had given him something, a gift, a power he didn't understand yet. It had trusted him with its life, and now it was up to him to protect it. As the alien's breathing slowed, John clenched his fists. The warmth in his palms grew stronger. He had to figure this out. Whatever was coming, he had to be ready. The desert was still outside, but John knew the calm wouldn't last. John hadn't slept in over 24 hours. The alien baby elephant lay on his workbench, its breathing still faint, but steady. After the mental exchange that had flooded his mind with visions, warnings, and, somehow, power, John had spent hours staring at his hands, waiting for something, anything to happen. The flicker of blue light he had seen in his palm the night before was gone. At first, he thought it might have been his imagination, a trick of his exhausted mind. But deep down, he knew it was real. The alien baby had shared something with him. It had passed on a part of itself, its energy, its gift, and John had to figure out how to use it. But there was no time. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath him, rattling the tools on his workbench and sending his old radio skittering to the floor. John's eyes snapped toward the horizon, just beyond the open garage door. The desert sky, once a peaceful canvas of stars, was now marred by strange, dark shapes hovering in the distance. They were here. The invaders. John grabbed his rifle, more out of habit than hope. He knew a few bullets wouldn't stand a chance against what he had seen in his vision, that heavily armored hunters, bristling with advanced technology, and the weapons that could vaporize entire forests with a single shot. Still, he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling sand through the air. But even through the haze, John could make out the sleek, angular forms of 5 ships descending from the sky. They moved in perfect unison, like a predatory pack closing in on its prey. The ships were unlike anything John had ever seen, black, almost featureless, absorbing the moonlight like voids. They landed softly on the desert floor, their sleek legs digging into the sand with unnatural precision. John's heart pounded in his chest. His fingers tightened around the rifle, even though he knew it was futile. Whatever these things were, they were here for the alien baby, and they wouldn't leave until they had it, or until they had killed anyone standing in their way. The first ship's door opened with a hiss, and out stepped a figure, tall, humanoid, but with a cold, mechanical edge. Its face was masked by a metallic visor, and its body was covered in sleek, silver armor that shimmered in the moonlight. It carried a weapon integrated into its arm, a glowing barrel that John recognized from the vision. This was the same weapon that had destroyed the aliens' world. Behind the leader, 4 more figures emerged, each identical in their armor, their movements precise and efficient. They spread out in a formation, scanning the area with their weapons raised. John ducked back into the garage, his heart racing. They were coming for the alien. But now they knew about him too. There was no way to run, nowhere to hide. His mind raced. He needed a plan. Then he remembered. The energy. The alien had given him something powerful. He just had to figure out how to use it. John's hands were trembling, but he closed his eyes and tried to focus, tried to reach that same place he had felt when the connection with the creature was strongest. He focused on the warmth he had felt in his palm, on the flicker of light. Come on, John, he thought. It's in there. You can do this. The hum of the invaders' ships grew louder, the sound of their metallic footsteps drawing closer. They were almost at the garage. John could hear their low, mechanical voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The baby alien stirred on the table, letting out a weak, pained sound. John's eyes snapped open. He couldn't wait any longer. Gripping the rifle tightly, he stepped out into the open, staring down the invaders as they approached. The leader stopped, raising its arm toward him, the weapon glowing brighter. John's stomach churned. He was going to die. He could feel it. But if this was the end, he wasn't going to let them take the alien without a fight. I don't know what you want, John said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. But you're not getting it. The leader tilted its head, analyzing John like a bug under a microscope. The weapon in its arm began to hum, a growing energy building inside it, ready to fire. Then, in the distance, John saw something, a pulse of light from the rod inside his garage, the same rod the alien had used to communicate with him. It glowed softly, as if responding to the approaching threat. The warmth in John's chest returned, stronger this time. He felt the energy building within him, swirling in his veins, begging to be released. Suddenly, as the leader's weapon fired, instinct took over. John raised his hand, and without thinking, a brilliant blue light erupted from his palm. The energy formed a barrier in front of him, absorbing the blast and sending ripples of blue light through the air. The force of it knocked the leader backward, its weapon sputtering with sparks. John stared at his hand in disbelief. He had done it. The energy was real. He could control it. The invaders hesitated, clearly surprised. For a brief moment, the leader glanced at its subordinates as if reassessing the situation. But the hesitation didn't last long. The leader barked a command, and the others raised their weapons in unison, firing all at once. John's instincts kicked in. The warmth in his chest flared, and he threw his arms out, projecting another wave of blue energy that engulfed the entire garage. The alien on the table was safe behind the barrier, and the invaders' blasts fizzled against it, leaving the air crackling with electricity. His heart pounded, adrenaline surging through him. He had no idea how he was doing this, but it didn't matter. He had to protect the alien, no matter what. John stepped forward, his eyes locked on the invaders. "You want to fight?" "Fine," he growled, feeling the energy building inside him again. "Let's do this." With a surge of power, John thrust his hands forward, sending a massive pulse of blue energy toward the group. The blast slammed into the invaders, knocking 3 of them off their feet. The remaining 2 staggered, their armor sparking as they tried to recover. John wasn't done. He could feel the energy flowing through him now, wild and uncontrollable. He unleashed another wave, this one more focused, and it struck the leader square in the chest, sending it flying back into the ship. The impact was so intense that the ship itself rattled, and a panel burst into flames. For a moment, everything went still. The invaders, stunned by the sheer force of John's attack, regrouped. The leader pulled itself to its feet, damaged but not out of the fight. Its visor flickered, revealing a single, glowing eye beneath the cracked surface. But John wasn't scared anymore. The fear that had paralyzed him before was gone, replaced by a strange calm. He wasn't just some mechanic from the middle of nowhere. He had power that could stand up to these invaders. The leader raised its hand, giving a sharp signal. The remaining invaders retreated toward the ships, abandoning their pursuit. John stood his ground, ready to unleash another wave if necessary, but the invaders didn't try to fight again. The leader stared at John for a long, tense moment, its glowing eye narrowing. Then, without a word, it turned and climbed into the ship. The ships rose into the air, disappearing into the night sky as quickly as they had come. John lowered his hands, the energy inside him fading. His body ached, and his mind felt foggy, as though he had just run a marathon. But they were gone. The invaders had left. He stumbled back into the garage, collapsing onto the chair beside the alien. Its eyes were barely open, but there was a faint glow in them, a sign that it had seen what happened. Its trunk moved weakly, brushing against his hand in a gesture of gratitude. "You're safe," John whispered, his voice hoarse. "I told you I'd help." The alien closed its eyes, its breathing slowing once again, but this time, it was peaceful. John leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. He had survived. They both had. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. The invaders would come back. They would send more. But next time, John would be ready. The desert was eerily quiet after the battle, the only sound being the faint hum of the remaining energy still coursing through John's body. His heart pounded in his chest as the alien baby elephant lay quietly on the workbench, its wound finally stabilized, though its iridescent skin had lost much of its shimmer. The invaders were gone for now, but John knew they would return. They wouldn't give up so easily. His entire body ached from the energy he had channeled during the fight, his muscles burning with the strain of using powers he barely understood. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he wiped it away, glancing at the desert horizon. He had only managed to drive them off. They would regroup, and next time, they'd bring more firepower. He needed to be prepared. I'm just a mechanic, he muttered to himself, looking down at his hands. His palms still glowed faintly from the blue energy that had saved him earlier, though now the light flickered like a dying flame. He clenched his fists. How am I supposed to fight an army? The alien baby stirred, and John felt a pulse of thought creep into his mind. It was weaker than before, but the message was still clear. You are not alone. John sat down beside the creature, resting a hand gently on its head. I don't know how to use this, whatever it is. I got lucky back there. But they'll be back, and I don't think I can fight them off again. Not by myself. The alien's trunk curled weakly around John's wrist, and a wave of warmth spread from its touch, calming his nerves. Another thought echoed through his mind. The energy is in you. Trust it. John sighed and looked out into the dark desert again. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But this creature, the last of its kind, had chosen him. It had shared its power with him, given him the ability to protect them both. He couldn't turn his back now. He couldn't just run. He stood up, his determination solidifying like steel in his gut. The invaders would return, but this time, he would be ready. If he was going to protect this alien and stop these hunters from whatever they were doing, he needed a plan. He grabbed the rod the alien had used to communicate and focused on it again, hoping for more insight. The metal felt cool against his skin, and the second he touched it, another surge of thoughts flooded his mind. This time, it was less chaotic. John saw the alien species again, how they had lived in peace for centuries, using their unique energy to power cities, heal wounds, and connect with each other. Their energy wasn't just a tool, it was life itself, a force that bonded them to their planet and to one another. The hunters, the invaders, were after that energy, trying to harvest it for their own dark purposes. They had destroyed the alien's homeworld, draining it of its power, and now they had come to Earth, chasing the last remaining survivor, hungry for the energy it possessed. John now understood. They weren't just going to take the baby elephant, they were going to extract its energy, its life force, until nothing was left. They would use that same process to drain Earth, leaving it a lifeless husk like the alien's home. He had to stop them. John's fingers tightened around the rod, and he felt another surge of power flow through him. This time, it felt more controlled, as if he was beginning to understand how to wield it. He wasn't just channeling the energy anymore, he was becoming a conduit for it. The blue glow in his hands grew brighter, more stable. He closed his eyes, concentrating, and felt the energy pulse in time with his heartbeat. He could feel the alien's connection to him growing stronger, its life force intertwined with his own. He could sense its trust, its hope. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine cut through the air, jolting John back to the present. He looked up to see the dark ships returning this time. There were more of them. At least a dozen sleek, black vessels descended from the sky, their engines rumbling like a coming storm. The leader's ship hovered at the front, its cracked visors still flickering from their earlier battle. John's heart sank. This was it. They're here, he said aloud, more to himself than the alien. He grabbed his rifle, even though he knew it wouldn't be enough. This time, he'd have to rely on the energy within him. He'd have to trust it, just like the alien had told him. The ships landed, kicking up clouds of sand and dust as the invaders emerged again, their weapons already drawn. But something was different this time. The air around them crackled with strange energy, and John realized they weren't just here to capture, they were preparing to annihilate everything. The lead invader raised its arm, its weapon glowing red as it prepared to fire. John felt the familiar warmth return to his chest. Without hesitation, he raised his hand, and the blue energy burst from his palm, forming a protective barrier around the garage. The first blast from the invaders' weapons hit the barrier and dissipated, sending ripples of light through the air. But the invaders were relentless. They fired again and again, their red blasts pounding against the blue shield with increasing intensity. John gritted his teeth, feeling the strain of maintaining the energy field. His arms ached, and his vision blurred as the power surged through him, pushing him to his limits. Trust it. You are stronger than you know. The alien's voice echoed in his mind, steadying him. John took a deep breath, focusing the energy more deliberately. He could feel it now, like a current running through his body, connected to the rod in his hand and the creature on the table. It wasn't just about defense. He could fight back. With a surge of determination, John extended his other hand, releasing a wave of blue energy toward the invaders. The blast hit them hard, knocking two of the armored figures to the ground. But the others kept advancing, their weapons glowing brighter as they prepared to breach the shield. John couldn't hold them off forever. He could feel his energy draining, the power inside him starting to flicker like a dying flame. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and his arms trembled under the strain. He had to do something drastic, something that would end this once and for all. Then, the alien stirred again. Its trunk lifted weakly, and a pulse of energy flowed into John's mind. Combine our strength. Together, we can end this. John nodded, understanding what he had to do. He closed his eyes and focused on the connection between them, letting the alien's energy merge with his own. It was like a dam breaking inside him. A flood of raw, electric power coursed through his veins, filling every cell of his body with unimaginable force. When John opened his eyes, his entire body glowed with a brilliant blue light, his hands crackling with raw energy. He looked up at the invaders, now close enough that he could see the dark eyes behind their visors. With a roar, John unleashed everything. A massive pulse of energy exploded from his body, sending a shockwave across the desert. The ground shook violently, and the invaders were thrown back, their weapons disintegrating under the force of the blast. The lead ship crumpled like paper, its hull torn apart by the surge of power. One by one, the ships exploded in mid-air, their engines frying from the overload of energy. The invaders themselves collapsed, their mechanical parts sparking as they short-circuited and fell lifeless to the ground. When the dust settled, the desert was silent again. John collapsed to his knees, utterly drained. His body felt like it had been run through a wringer, every muscle screaming in pain. But it was over. The invaders were gone. He looked up at the alien baby elephant, still lying on the table, and saw that its eyes were now fully open. The wound on its head had closed, and its skin shimmered once more with that beautiful, iridescent glow. "You did it," John whispered, smiling weakly. "We did it." The alien reached out with its trunk, brushing against John's arm in a gesture of thanks. John closed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. For the first time in days, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The invaders wouldn't be coming back. Not after this. John had saved the alien. And, in a way, the alien had saved him too. As the first light of dawn crept over the desert horizon, John leaned back against his workbench, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the alien's home was gone, but here, on Earth, a new beginning was possible. Whatever came next, John knew he wasn't just a mechanic anymore.